Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, all of our listeners, and most particularly to you, my friend David Swenson. We've been at this for a while now, and it just gets more pleasurable for me, and we've had a great 2018. And, you know, my life, I say this sometimes on this program, but you know it's true. My life is like a freight train. I just am hurtled along from one thing to the next, one project, one place, one zip code, one taxi, one Uber, etc. And I don't have much time to reflect. It's just, you know, you miss the train and now you're really in trouble. So I love this show every year when we look back on the programs that we did, 52 of them, a fresh program every week, and we get a chance to sort of look back. And, you know, I have to say I actually forget about some of them. And then when I look at it, I think, oh, yeah, that was a fun program. You know, we got to interview Joseph Ellis, or that's when we had Pat Brodowski on and the Tomato Kings of Florida that came on to help us. Or that was the program in which we talked about peaceful transition of power from one administration to the next. Or the trilogy we did on James Madison. We only expected to do a single program on Madison.
Well, then we got into it.
But he kind of took over. I mean, Madison is something. And so I really like this retrospective. It really gives me a sense of where we've been, and it also helps me to think about, well, what didn't we talk about that we should have?
Oh, and there's so much. There's so much.
I got a letter from a young friend of mine who said, okay, enough Madison. How about Monroe? He always gets short shrift.
Well, speaking of letters.
Yes, sir.
And speaking of Madison.
Yes. Oh, here it comes.
Yeah. No.
I don't know. I have not read this, but I have a sense
of
it.
You know,
I have a sense of it.
It comes from Callahan Cole. I have to say this letter made me laugh out loud.
I'll bet it did.
It did, and I needed it that day. I needed it.
Let me see. This is Callan Cole. I don't know where he's from. All right. Yeah. He says, I would like to begin with telling you that I've been listening to the Thomas Jefferson since I was about 11 years old.
11?
Yeah. Mind you, not avidly until now at the age of 17. Of course, being younger, I may not understand every single topic and explanation, but I've learned a tremendous amount. I'd like to thank you for doing the show, and I'm eager to hear more. The main purpose of writing to you is that I came across an amusing observation while listening to your talk on the subject of James Madison. Mr. Jenkinson had explained that in moments of Mr. Jefferson veering off the subject and delving into stories and findings, Mr. Madison was able to bring him back on subject, most times with some degree of difficulty. Upon hearing this, I immediately thought of Mr. Jenkinson and how Mr. Swenson has at times brought him back to the subject at such times like Mr. Jefferson talking about his ukulele. Hey, I love my ukulele. Tours, carrying a man up a mountain, just to name a few. That was Russ, and believe me, you try carrying him up the mountain, just to name a few. And Mr. Swenson saying that they must get back to the show or getting him into another subject. You could say at times Mr. Swenson is the Madison to Mr. Jenkinson's Jefferson. Again, I'd like to thank you for your program and hope you have found this amusing as well. And I wish you both a wonderful holiday season.
First, Mr. Cole.
Callan Cole.
Thank you very much. And I must say at the outset, I mean, you could be Jefferson and respond by saying, I knew Mr. Madison.
I'm counting to
Mr.
10.
Madison was a friend of mine. You, sir, are no Madison.
I was going to say, count to 10, then 100. Come on, Callan.
No, that was great. Yeah. It made me laugh out loud.
That little gutter snipe, I hope
geez.
I hope there's no coal in his bin this year. I hope
we are thrilled to get this letter, and I am thrilled that you are listening. What do you mean? It was just good fun.
No, it's great. It's lovely, and thank you for
call
taking
him
the time.
A
gutter snipe. That's good, isn't it?
Yeah, that's period.
Well, it beats some of the
Mr. Jefferson.
the terms that are currently floating around our culture. What a lovely thing that he took the time
and
to
that
send
he's
this
been
letter.
listening since
and
he was
that
11.
It clearly shows that he's amused by this and so on. I think, maybe a little unfair.
Kind of save that for the podcast.
Yeah, put that up on
intro,
let's plaster that on the wall of the barn, shall we?
So it was a fun show this week. We looked back through all the 52 shows that we've done. Didn't get to all of them, obviously, but just kind of glossed through a lot of them and pitched the website so you can go find them, join the 1776 Club.
And about the ukulele.
Yeah.
I'm going to get it this week.
Are you good?
I'm driving to Grand Forks tomorrow, which
Excellent.
is, that's 300 miles,
yeah,
maybe 280. I'm going to take the back roads. I'm going to do all
that's the way to do it.
Craziest back roads.
Yeah.
Try to get on roads I've never been on.
Take a winter survival kit.
And I'm going to get my ukulele from Kevin, and I'm going to do some research at the University of North Dakota, special collections on the Nonpartisan League and some other things that I'm fascinated by. When I do that, a couple of things. I'll be passing from the territory of the Louisiana Purchase into the Hudson's Bay system. There's a continental divide in North Dakota. Jefferson didn't buy all of North Dakota. I think the ukulele is a splendid instrument, and I don't think it's digressive to talk about it at all. But I'm excited about the way our listeners, and frankly many of them, send us tributes and send us gifts and send us their thoughts. It matters. I'll tell you what, when I read a letter of tribute or someone sends something to us, it really makes a difference, because on any, as you know, we don't take any stipends for what we do. It's a labor of love. On any given day you think, okay, am I tired of Jefferson or am I not tired of Jefferson?
Is anybody listening?
Is anyone still listening? Yeah. And then when you see that there's somebody for whom it's made a difference, my friend Jimmy, the mountain climber, and
one word, humbling.
It's humbling and it's inspiring, and
we're lucky to be able to get to do this.
It's amazing. And I think back, for example, that in all the years that we've ever done this, which is now a lot of them, the last person I ever expected to get fulsome, effusive, deeply sincere high praise from was Chrysler, and he came through with the greatest tribute we've ever had.
He did.
It makes you want to do this right.
Both of us choked up. We could go on, but let's go to the show. I will say that next week we are going to look forward rather than
Janus
back.
Looks backward and forward. Next week we'll be looking forward to suggestions that our listeners have sent to us.
Mostly they posted them on a Facebook page, fans of the Thomas
and
Jefferson
then our
Hour.
web fellow has also done something, helped us kind of think through the rhythm of the year.
My God, he's going to organize us?
He's going to order us around, I'm afraid.
But you can handle that.
I'm just
kind of, I don't know.
And it's going to be Freudian for you.
It'll be great.
But that's fantastic. And so thank you to everyone. You know, this program, it sounds obvious. It could not exist unless there were somebody out there listening.
And one other thing. As this program is broadcasting, you either are on your way or at Loxa Lodge.
Going back to Loxa for this is probably the 25th time I've been there, for the winter encampment. So there's a humanities retreat on water in the west.
And that's you should be there or the week after.
Be driving.
Yeah, I don't have my dates
Billings,
straight,
along the Yellowstone River to Bozeman, to Missoula,
so it's
and west.
too late for people to go on that one.
Just
but
about.
There's more of them. You can find all on the website.
The one that they should now be thinking about is Steinbeck's California, 2 through 8 March. John Steinbeck's California, 2 through 8 March. Anyway, I'll be at Loxa to do the Shakespeare Without Tears seminar and Water in the West. You know, water is going to be one of the most significant issues of the 21st century.
When you get back, let's talk about that some.
I'll tell you what I've learned from all these extraordinary people, many of whom are Jefferson Hour people. So,
great.
So let's look back for an hour here on the year 2018 and a little essay about New Year's at Fort Clatsop. Thanks for listening, everyone.
Good day, citizens, and welcome to the Thomas Jefferson Hour, and a Happy New Year to all of you listening.
Happy New Year, everyone. We are glad to be here, and we so appreciate all of you listening to us. The holidays are now over.
Oh, must the holidays be over so soon, sir?
They do come and go, yes. Yeah. But I had a great holiday myself. How about you?
Oh, terrific. You know me. That doesn't take much, right?
We're not... My mother was a big Christmas person.
Yes.
Our listeners will understand what that means.
Yeah, we've talked about
many trees and hundreds of ornaments,
special dishes,
fruitcakes, and special dishes and traditions and big Christmas. And she would have been bigger at it had she still. My father died 25 years ago, and so on. But she made more of Christmas than I'm actually quite comfortable with.
And I baked for you. I want to point that out.
I have next to me an exquisite loaf of bread, and it's not just
quite
bread.
Proud of it. Yeah,
there's some sesame seeds on it?
No. Flax.
Those are flax seeds?
Yeah, flax
seeds.
And rolled oats and stuff like that.
I don't think I have it in front of me. I don't think I've ever had bread with flax seeds. You didn't crush them; they're there.
No, it's great. Yeah.
And you've had this bread.
Yes.
And what does I mean no disrespect. What does the flax add?
Oh, maybe an errant crunch every once in a while.
But is there a flax taste?
A little bit, yeah. It's kind of earthy.
Well, how did you come to that?
Well, I make bread during the winter. I try to make bread every weekend.
Do you work from yeast or starter?
I proof my yeast.
You proof your yeast?
Yeah, you get your cup and a quarter of water, and you put a little bit of sugar in it.
Just a tiny bit, just to feed that yeast.
Just to feed the yeast, and then you put it in the warm water and mix it up and wait till it bubbles a little bit.
And then you hand knead it?
No, I can't do that. I've never been able
to
master
that.
I use a mixer ball.
You have a mixer, a
good
master
one,
of
yes.
some sort.
Yes.
And you put it, and then that requires your dough to be a little on the spongy side so as not to bung up the mixer.
It's really quite simple.
So how long once you've added all your ingredients, how long do you mix?
6 to 10 minutes.
And then
I take it out and I knead it.
You do a little bit of kneading.
Yeah.
How do you shape it?
Put it in a pan.
Just dump it in a pan and then shape it a little.
Well, no, you have to let it rise. And then once it rises, you punch it down and then you put it in a pan, well greased.
And this is North Dakota flour.
It is. It's North Dakota Mill bread flour.
I don't know if our listeners know this.
It's the best. People come in.
North Dakota has the only state-owned mill and elevator in the country, and it dates back to the famous Nonpartisan League, which was a farmers' protest movement that swept across the state between 1915 and 1920. And so we have a state mill, which is in Grand Forks, North Dakota, a state mill and elevator. We're the number one producer of durum wheat in the world. That's your pasta. Mm-hmm. But we also produce hard red spring wheat, and we're always either number one or number two at that.
I don't know those numbers.
And these farmer protesters back in 1915 decided we were being colonialized by out-of-state banks and milling interests and railroads and so on. And they thought the only way that we can ever control our economic destiny is to have a state-owned elevator.
Well, they were tired of all of their hard work being turned into profit by someone else, and they didn't get a share of it.
And so they built their own elevator, which still exists, the only one in the country, and they built their own state bank, the only socialist state bank in the United States. And you know what it makes me think? I like a little rebellion now and then. It's as important in the political world as thunderstorms. It's Jefferson. Jefferson, I think, would have approved of the Nonpartisan League. I mean, 80% of the people of North Dakota were farmers. They felt that they were being just profoundly exploited, and they rose up and they didn't use pitchforks. They used the ballot box.
Right.
And they took back their destiny.
Wasn't there a terrible storm during the election?
And they used the primary. The primary was new, part of the progressive movement, and they realized third parties don't work. They had seen Theodore Roosevelt run as a third-party candidate in 1912, the most popular third-party candidacy ever, and he only got 29% of the vote. And they realized you can't win as a third party. We're a two-party country. So we have to take over one of the two parties. Well, there was no Democratic Party in North Dakota at the time. So they decided to take over the Republican Party by use of the primary. And the day of the primary in 1916, when this revolution happened, was June 28th. And it depended upon all these farmers. This is the age when there are not even any roads in North Dakota yet. These farmers had to get to the polls, and on that day there were terrible storms. June is often a very wet, stormy month on the Great Plains. And when this happened, the results of the election came in from the cities first, because that's the easier one to tally. And it looked as if, after all that effort, the farmers' protest, the Nonpartisan League moment had failed, and there was a glumness. And then suddenly, the next day, the rural returns came in, and it turns out that the farmer citizens, the nonpartisans, had won a stunning, overwhelming victory. They had taken North Dakota back, and that began the, I'd say, 6-year experiment of the Nonpartisan League. They gave us a state bank, a state mill and elevator. They gave us women's suffrage. They gave us workmen's compensation, child labor laws, grain grading, laws, workmen's compensation. I mean, this was the most progressive moment in the history of North Dakota ever. And this was this group of Jeffersonian farm rebels. I like a little rebellion and then.
I think he would approve. I still think he would be upset with our eastern border not being a straight line. But aside from that,
very upset with that he wanted rectilinear states, and there's absolutely no reason why the Red River should do. And just one little fun fact that I bet you've never thought about. Maybe you have, because our border is the river, which is sinuous in the extreme. It's just like 1 zillion S-curves. It's almost figure eights all the way up and all the way down. Because of that, from time to time, when the river is rampaging, it cuts through some of those oxbows, and guess what? Lands on the west side of the Red River are still Minnesota. Think of that. And lands now, because of the flood, on the east side of the Red River are in North Dakota. So if you look at a map, you think, oh, there's your border. But in fact, there are scattered acreages in what looks like Minnesota that are actually the sovereign state of North Dakota and taxed in North Dakota. And there are a small number of parcels that look as if they're in the sovereign state of North Dakota that are actually part of Minnesota and are taxed by Minnesota authorities.
Yeah, Jefferson would not like that.
That's why he was against
straight lines.
And I'll tell you what else would bother him: the time zones. Have you looked at that?
Yeah,
they're not straight. Why not?
I'm sorry.
The sun doesn't zig and zag.
I'm afraid I'm getting you off on a tangent again here.
But think of it. If Jefferson were here and you said, how would you draw time zones?
He wouldn't do it at all, would he?
Oh, yes. I mean, he gets it that there's local noon, so you got to have time zones. But his view would be, you go to the North Pole and you go to the South Pole, and every X degrees of difference, you draw a straight line, and that's it. If it happens to go through the center of Charlottesville, well, okay. What's the point of doing it if you're not going to conform to the solar system? If you say, oh, well, we're going to take Gillette, Wyoming, and make it on mountain time, but because that's better for them. But we're going to do Casper, Wyoming, and we'll make it on Pacific time. Jefferson would say, no, either do it or don't. You wouldn't take a coinage system and say, sometimes a penny is a penny, but sometimes it's a penny and a half.
So you bring up Wyoming and Gillette and time zones and degrees, and it takes me back to a show a couple of years ago. The eclipse. And if I could use that as a segue.
But just say of that, we wound up unbeknownst to each other.
Right.
Sort of at the last second, me more than you.
Yeah.
We wound up within a few dozen miles of each other near Casper, Wyoming,
which was
the epicenter.
Yeah.
And we did a show, and I got to record there. It was one of the single most extraordinary moments of my entire life to be there and to watch. It's just, as you probably had the same experience, it's just undifferentiated Great Plains in every direction out there. I mean, it is the definition of godforsaken.
Oh, no.
But I love it. But you know what I mean. Just like, oh, my goodness, you're in the middle of a vast treeless plain in every direction to infinity. I was sitting up against a fence, and suddenly it went dark. And you just stand up and you think, oh, my goodness.
Yeah, I don't even know the right words to describe it, but it's
surreal.
It's surreal, but it's something very primitive as well.
You got it. You nailed it. There's something deep in the very raw, primitive nature of human responses to phenomena, because your whole system is saying, it can't be dark. It can't be dark.
What happened? Like the first time you see a tornado, you can't believe it's really there.
You can't believe it. It has that beautiful form, for one thing. Primitive people would think, well, what if God took away the sun and it's not coming back? We shouldn't have killed that guy in that sacrifice last year.
Anyway, my segue was that at the end of the year, we like to wish everyone a happy new year, but we also kind of like to take a look back.
Like Janus, looking back and forward.
So this week we're going to look back. Next week we're going to look forward. So I have provided you with a piece of text here that we call it the show blurbs. It's every show blurbs that we did in this last year.
So you're going to go through. We're going to go through a few of these.
Well, I thought it might be kind of fun.
There's the astonishing thing. We do 52 programs per annum.
Yeah, and we have kept to that for years.
Most programs do 13 or maybe 26.
Careful how you put that. We're setting ourselves up for comparison here.
No, I'm not comparing. I'm just saying we work too hard.
Oh, I don't know. I think it's good, clean fun.
52
personally.
fresh, well, I won't say fresh, 52 programs per annum on the Jefferson
I
Hour.
requested this last year, and we started
I like this show.
with one about books. You remember that?
About what books?
The title of the show was Fiction or Non, because I almost read entirely history and biographies, but I'd stumbled across a piece of fiction that I really enjoyed. And
so you made me choose 5 Jeffersonian pieces of fiction. Shall I mention them briefly?
Sure.
The first was Tristram Shandy, his favorite novel by Lawrence Stern. The second was Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, very important and one of my favorite novels. The third was Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift, one of the greatest books ever written. The fourth was, many people regard as the first novel, Cervantes' Don Quixote. And the fifth was by Henry Fielding, Joseph Andrews, or the History of the Adventures of Joseph Andrews and of his friend Mr. Abraham Adams. Those five works of fiction.
That was our first show of 2018, and we're going to take just a short break. When we come back, we'll talk about some of the other fun shows that we did last year. All right, sir?
We'll be back in a minute. We're talking about the programs we did in the calendar year 2018. You're listening to a special edition, the last of the year, of the Thomas Jefferson Hour. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the Thomas Jefferson Hour, your weekly conversation with or about President Thomas Jefferson. I recognize that I neglected to introduce you in the first segment. You are the creator of the Thomas Jefferson Hour. You are the gentleman who portrays President Jefferson when he's here, Mr. Clay Jenkinson. Welcome, sir.
I'm delighted to be here. I never would have thought when I moved to the Great Plains now 14 years ago and walked in this door to the studio, not the barn. The barn did not exist then.
Well, it did, but not for us.
Not as our site. Yeah. And I said, would you be willing to do a few Jefferson Hours?
Oh, God, I was so nervous. I really was. And the first show we did was on technology, because I started reading on Jefferson, and the first thing that struck me was what a gadget guy he was. And it was fun. It was really fun.
To our listeners, if you have not read Robinson Crusoe, Gulliver's Travels, Don Quixote, or Joseph Andrews, this is not like reading Joyce's Ulysses or even Moby Dick. These are some of the most readable, remarkable, extraordinary works of fiction ever. Tristram Shandy is a little harder. By Lawrence Stern, it was Jefferson's favorite novel, but these are some of the best reads that exist. And I think that one thing I've been thinking about, David, is that books are really central to Jefferson, and they're central to us, too. So we're going to be doing some programs in the coming year, part of the Jefferson Book Club.
Well, I really enjoyed that show, and I recall it. And it was a discovery for me, because I really don't read much fiction, and I got caught by something and started to think about it, and I wanted Jefferson's understanding and approval, and he gave it to me.
You've made a discovery, too, which is that for books that were written before the year 1900, most of them are free on the World Wide Web. I mean, now most of everything that's ever been written up until copyright is available either free or nearly free.
If you have an electronic reader,
if you have a reader of some sort,
which
think what Jefferson would think of that.
He would like that a lot.
And we're just getting started here. It won't be long before every book ever published is searchable, free online.
Yeah, sites like Gutenberg, archive.org, and a lot of these are just citizens who are doing them for free. There's not a profit motive. The motive is enlightenment. Exactly.
And it's so interesting to me because Jefferson would love this. I often have to find something like, it's from Walden, or it's from Don Quixote, or it's from Moby Dick. Before the internet, that was really hard to do. Now, I go in, look for Walden online, I type in some pretty weak paraphrase of what I'm interested in, and bang, I almost always get it. The searchability of these texts has, well, first of all, it makes one, a scholar, infinitely more productive. It shortens the labor of research by magnitudes. And then when you finally find it, you can also cut and paste it so that it's just an amazing resource that everyone needs to spend more time with. Remember back in the early days of the internet, you type in Walden plus tree plus, and then like nothing, it'd be like 20 searches, all dry holes. Today, if you get reasonably close, it takes you in.
There were a number of shows that we did last year. We talked to the president and to you about, just perspective on government. We had a show early in January about the peaceful transition of power. I remember that, and it was great to talk to President Jefferson about that. It's sort of the miracle of America that goes back to our founding days.
And John Adams breaking the code by not staying to see Jefferson inaugurated.
I have different feelings about that.
Yeah, I know you do.
It's an easy punch on
Jefferson
Adams.
felt it. He told Abigail Adams it was the one thing that he found hard to forgive.
And her defense was that he felt that he should stay out of the way.
And he had other things on his mind.
No, but I get that. If you look at Adams and his character and all that we know about him, you're probably right that it was a punch, but I still have to give him the benefit of the doubt.
Well, you're very kind. The program on
I'm an Adams
Margaret Bayard Smith.
That was fun.
I'll tell you something about that. First of all, she's fantastic. She had this kind of girl crush on Jefferson. She was married to Samuel Harrison Smith, who was the editor of the National Intelligencer, and she met Jefferson and was shocked by what a sweet-tempered, humble man, because she'd been told that he was this fiery revolutionary. So then they had this friendship, and she had this kind of crush on Thomas Jefferson. When he left town in 1909, he gave her a geranium. Right. And he said, you above all people will take care of this. It's in pretty bad shape, but I know you'll bring it back. It was to her, we know a lot about Jefferson thanks to her. She's the one who told us that Jefferson was a tree hugger and said that killing a tree unnecessarily should be regarded as murder. Mm-hmm. She was also the one that told us that he had his pet mockingbird, Dick, that he would allow to fly around and sit on his shoulder and eat crumbs from his lips. And now I'm the editor of this magazine, this journal called We Proceeded On. It's a quarterly Lewis and Clark journal.
People that'll come up later in the program.
But in that, I had a wonderful painting by a man named Peter Waddell of the White House Historical Association of Jefferson and Lewis in the state dining room of the White House, surrounded by all of Jefferson's stuff.
It's kind of like one of those where you find all the hidden items.
Right, yeah. Where's Elmo? Where's
something like that.
Anyway, but anyway, I had a quiz in this magazine, this journal. People should subscribe. It's the Lewis and Clark Trail Heritage Foundation. But lots of those descriptions came right out of Margaret Bayard Smith. She's the one who noticed all of these things in Jefferson's little world. And
two things. It's Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego, I believe is the reference.
Well, there's another one, too.
Where's Waldo?
That's it. Waldo, not Elmo.
So I wanted just to point out that she also has a book, The First 40 Years of Washington Society. We were talking about books that you can get free online. That's one you can find.
It's a great book about what life was like when Washington was a brand new federal capital.
And you know me, I am just an absolute sucker for first-hand accounts.
And she's a spirited, but she's the one who said, remember, going back to peaceful transitions, she's the one who said a line that I've quoted many, many times, that she was at his inaugural address, and she said, "This day I've witnessed one of the most amazing things, the peaceful transfer of power from one administration to another. These are usually attended by cataclysms and convulsions and violence. But in this our happy republic," remember that line?
Right, yeah.
But in this our happy republic, that is one of the greatest things ever written about transfer of power by this relatively unknown woman, Margaret Bayard Smith, in her book. Well, that was actually correspondence, but it wound up in her book, The First 40 Years of Washington
That was show
Society.
1269, and I should point out that all of these shows are online. If you're a 1776 Club member, you can find any of these shows. So if you're interested to hear us talk with President Jefferson, you can find it there. And then there was show 1270. I had to learn a new word.
Kosciuszko.
No. Extirpation. Extirpation, yeah. We answered listener questions about a number of things, but it ended up being Jefferson's distaste for dogs.
Oh, that's was a rough one.
That's where that word came from, right?
So you're going to hate this. He used this term twice. Once was about dogs, and what happened was that the dogs were becoming semi-feral. There was a population explosion of dogs. They were killing sheep. They were doing a lot of damage.
He was speaking as a farmer at that point, don't you think?
The dog population had gotten out of hand, and so he sent orders saying he wanted most of the dogs put down. Well, that's just always automatically upsetting. That's the Michael Vick world. No one likes that world.
When did you stop beating your wife?
Right.
That kind of thing. When did you stop killing dogs?
But it gets worse because he also used the word extirpation with respect to Native Americans and said, as long as they cooperate and sell us their lands for fair price and remove themselves when we ask them to do so, we will find a way to live with them. But should they prove recalcitrant, that we may have to drive them beyond the Mississippi, and we can't rule out extirpation. And so that's the starkest thing that's ethnic cleansing in a sense. Well, it is ethnic cleansing, and it's the starkest thing that Jefferson ever wrote along those lines. Thank goodness it wasn't his usual view of Native Americans.
Then we went on to do a show about current events, and after that, we were joined by your lovely daughter for a couple of shows.
Catherine Missouri Walker Jenkinson.
A couple of shows, one on Raleigh and one on the classics, and they are both classic episodes. So she's in New York.
Still
now,
New York.
Right?
She's planning to go to law school or to get a PhD in the humanities, trying to decide whether she wants a noble, impoverished life in Northeast Illinois State Community College, or if she wants to become a lawyer and be rich and famous and live wherever she wants.
Well, I have a nephew that became a lawyer.
Yeah?
I've told you. You met him.
Yeah, the Lego man.
Yeah, he went from law into...
He's the Lego genius.
He's like all over the world.
He's the greatest Lego man in the world.
Yeah, he's traveling.
You and I have been to his studio in Manhattan.
And it's not necessarily if she becomes a
lawyer. No, of course not. But she...
Whatever she does, she will do it well, and she will enjoy it, and you will be proud of her forever.
It was fun to have her on the program. People have asked for her to come back. We'll try to make that. She wrote her master's dissertation on Sir Walter Raleigh in prison, in the Tower of London, where he was...
Oh, that was a great
10 years
show.
of his life.
That was a great show. Yeah.
And so we had fun with that. Raleigh's one of my favorite authors, and Jefferson was a Raleigh lover because Raleigh named Virginia.
We need to call her for this show sometime. Then we started our year-long periods of discussions with the author, Joe Ellis, and that was really fun.
Well,
all of those shows have been great. He's a terrific guy.
In my opinion, Joseph Ellis, formerly of Mount Holyoke, now retired, is the single best scholar of the early national period in this country. He's prolific. He's written a bunch of books. They're all great. My favorite is Passionate Sage about John Adams, but he wrote the character of Thomas Jefferson, American Sphinx.
Right. Yeah.
He has a book on Abigail and John, founding family.
Which we moved into later in the year. And
he's amazing. And now he has a new book, which is sort of taking the founders and projecting them onto the current situation in the world and seeing if they have wisdom for us.
Mm-hmm. And we also talked with him about his book, Revolutionary Summer.
And then when I went to see that same Catherine Missouri Walker Jenkinson, did I tell you this? So we're in New York. It's the summer. And so I'm there, and I said, what would you like to do? And she said, we're renting a car, and we're going to Weehawken to see where Hamilton was murdered by Burr. So I said, okay, I've never been there. So we go there, and we reenacted the duel several times, so about 104. But there it is. And they have the rock right there on which Hamilton lay his head as he was dying and so on. And so then we went I said, as long as we have a car, we're going to Sagamore Hill, which is on Long Island, Roosevelt's place. But to get there, we decided to go to the top tip, the very northernmost tip of Manhattan, to see the very spot where Washington was able to escape. So as you recall, the British had Washington bottled up on Manhattan Island, and they could have ended the war probably right then, but the Howe brothers didn't press their advantage, and somehow they let Washington and his ragamuffin group of about 12,000 troops get out. And the only way they could get out was this very narrow neck at the very top of Manhattan. And so we went there. We parked the car, and we walked across this little bridge, and we realized this is amazing, that you can go stand there. It's all urbanized. It's not the most beautiful part of Manhattan, but it's there. And so we lingered there and took a bunch of photographs, and then we drove to Sagamore Hill on Roosevelt-related stuff. This was, I think, actually Labor Day. it was amazing that I was able to visit 2 prime Jefferson sites, and guess who talked me into it? None other than that occasional host of the program, Miss Catherine Missouri.
And that was a real fun discussion with Joe Ellis. The name of that book is Revolutionary Summer.
And that's where this neck thing comes in at the top of New York.
The Birth of American Independence. And that was kind of the beginning of the book club's era.
Really good book, really great man.
Then we went on to talk about gerrymandering, and that's still pretty
Elbridge Gerry
contemporary.
Gave us gerrymander, which is the deliberate distortion of a congressional district or a state district for political advantage.
And then we went on to answer listener questions the next show. And one of the ones that I remember discussing, and we've talked about this before, is that every generation should replace the Constitution. Jefferson's wish.
The earth belongs to the living, 19 years, etc.
We keep coming back to that.
Well, that's pretty important part of Jefferson's radical agenda. I mean, he drove his friend James Madison into deep frustration over statements like this, but Jefferson believed that each generation had a right to inherit the universe as unencumbered by the past as possible.
Then one of my favorite shows, and you called for it, was The Art of the Letter. We discussed letter writing with President Jefferson, and then after that, it was getting on towards spring, April, and one of my favorite shows, it was called Tomatoes.
There are 2 types of Jefferson Hour listeners. Those who love the garden shows and those who think, get on with it already. Get on with it already. But I love the garden show.
It was really fun because we talked to Craig LaHoulier and Harry Klee.
He's Epic Tomato.
My favorite tomato book, and just a gentleman, and he's out doing stuff all the time.
I love it that you can actually say my favorite tomato book. Yeah. Not too many people would have that.
Well, the other one is one that you gifted me last year, the catalog book. That's just great, yeah. And then we talked to Professor Harry Klee.
The man this is University of Florida. He's trying to create a commercially viable tomato that actually tastes delicious.
And you know what? He did pretty good. I grew those.
Oh, so you got seeds from him,
right? And
how'd they come out?
Pretty good.
They're edible?
Oh, they're great.
But I mean, that's not commercial production.
Yeah, but you can tell growing them in your backyard that they are durable. They're quite uniform in size. They're not huge. They're smaller tomatoes, not like an heirloom, for instance. But they're uniform. They're tough, and they taste awfully good.
And remember from that show, the issue is durability.
Yeah.
It's easy enough to produce not anymore, but it was once easy to produce a delicious tomato. They've got to hold up in those crates over long distances until they get to Walmart or to your grocery store. Yeah. And so what we did historically is that we bred tomatoes for durability, not taking care of taste, and his desire is to get taste back into the equation.
And Craig LaHoulier's big deal was he's developing dwarf heirloom tomatoes so that if you, say, live in a city and you have a small patio,
he's growing them in 5-gallon pots.
Yeah, and these are great for that, and they're heirloom tasters. And now, of course, we ended that up with Pat Brodowski.
Our dear friend Pat Brodowski of Monticello, one of my favorite people in the world. She's like the living embodiment of craft. She weaves, she spins, she dyes, she builds houses, she builds barns.
She dyes cloth, right.
She uses indigo to dye cloth.
Yeah.
She's one of the most resourceful people I've ever met, and incredibly good-humored. And so we check in with her from time, not nearly enough.
Anyway, this year we need to talk to Craig LaHoulier and Professor Klee again.
We need to catch up with them and get some more seeds.
So maybe that too. Then we went to another question show, and every year at some point we talk about President Jefferson and slavery.
Has to come up. It's so important. It's central, but
to understanding Jefferson, right?
Yes, and it's important that we embrace this. You cannot be in denial about this any longer. Jefferson is deeply complicit in the legacy of racism and the legacy of slavery. This is not his best moment. We do take the whole man theory on this program, but it would be irresponsible to try to talk about Jefferson without talking about slavery and race, although you don't want it to take over the show either. It's a really hard balance.
And as you said during that show, History is like a picture puzzle, and half of the pieces or more are missing. There is something about Jefferson that makes us want to expose contradiction.
It's hard because Jefferson was one of the greatest men who ever lived, and right at the center of his life was an appalling breach of human rights.
And with that, sir, we do need to take a short break, but we'll be back in just a moment to talk about some of the shows.
We're in February now, right? And we're slowly working our way through the year.
I think we're at April now.
We're going to make it, yeah.
We'll be back in just a moment. You're listening to the Thomas Jefferson Hour.
Welcome back to the Thomas Jefferson Hour, the end of the year edition. I'm sitting here in the, not barn, but the studio. It's winter.
And after enjoying an incredible lunch that a friend...
Rob Barron, a friend of this program, said he wanted to cater a lunch for us.
And he did.
And we had it, and it was spectacular. So thank you, Rob. And
very festive.
Anyone else who wants to pony up with motels, cars, Jeeps?
No.
Thank you very much.
We're just grateful that you're listening.
I'm sitting across from the semi-permanent guest host of the Thomas Jefferson Hour.
The sensible one, right.
Yeah, exactly. Here we go. And David, Happy New Year to you.
Same to you, sir.
I look forward to a great 2019.
Me too.
But we're going over sort of a description, a kind of reliving through some of the programs of 2018. Let me say they're all available at our website, jeffersonhour.com.
Yeah, if you're a 1776 club member, you can get everything.
You get everything all the way back to 1914.
There's still many things that are there just on the site that they can get. We're not going to make it through all the shows. Can we just highlight a few of them?
Let's do a few of your favorites.
Well, I of course, there are two shows with Joe Ellis on his book, First Family.
So we talked about him in the earlier segment, but he's outstanding. He's the closest friend we have in the world of major historians.
Well, we did a number of shows with President Jefferson. We talked with him about the hardest job. That was sort of inspired by an article written by John Dickerson and how the presidency is really, it's too much for any one person, even probably Jefferson.
What the show told us was that even Jefferson worked 12, 13, 15 hours a day just to try to keep on top of being the first magistrate of this country.
And we did a show on common sense.
Paine's Common Sense.
Right. It was a book club episode.
Paine, of course, in a way, was the spark of the American Revolution. America's first bestseller sold, I think, 500,000 copies. I mean, it spread like wildfire, and it became like the text. It wasn't highfalutin, philosophical, John Lockean stuff. It was like, no, we need to break with Britain, and here's why.
And we put an audio version of that.
You did it. You recorded.
That was really fun.
You know what he said? An island cannot govern a continent. Mm-hmm. Boy, is that right.
We talked. We did our annual 4th of July show. Then we talked about judicial responsibility.
Well, that's a big issue, isn't it?
Yeah.
About what, we have all this crazy talk in America about we need originalists, or we need literalists, or we need strict constructionists, or we need to do what the founders had in mind. We need to have a much, much more nuanced and sophisticated national conversation about what the judicial branch responsibility is in our system. And boy, are we likely to see it in the year 2019.
Yeah, and bottom line is Jefferson, no fan of the court.
No fan of the court, and he didn't think the court should have standing. In other words, if we're anything like a democracy, then the people rule. So why would you take 9 unelected, unaccountable beings and let them veto the will of the people? For Jefferson, this was just a completely nonsensical notion. His 5th cousin, John Marshall, was the great Chief Justice for 34 years. And in those judicial squabbles, Marshall got the best of Jefferson every single time.
Mm-hmm. And we did an entire show about the map, Two Knees map. And I know your essay this week is to do with Lewis and Clark.
Right? I love Lewis and Clark. Of course, I'm now editing this journal. We proceeded on. I urge people to subscribe to it. But a friend of mine discovered that this map had been unearthed from a French library, that this map was drawn in 1805 by an Arikara man named Tunis, or Piaheto, and it had been buried inadvertently in a French archive all this time, and a scholar from now the University of Nebraska at Kearney had unearthed it. And so we we dedicated a whole issue of We Proceeded On to that, and it's a fascinating document. Here's a little update on that. Yankton, South Dakota has a museum. They called me a few months ago and said, we want that map in our museum. I helped them get it. It's now on display.
Great.
And they have interpretation that comes straight out of that issue of We Proceeded On.
We're going to run out of time here because it's about time to go to your essay, but just a couple other highlights. In August, I believe it was, you called for what you referred to as an alarm poll.
How alarmed are our listeners about the situation involving the Trump administration and Trump
we got
himself?
People
hundreds
who were,
of responses.
We did. People who were very
and thoughtful
and
careful.
People who weren't. Right. It was great.
But people on both sides of the spectrum. Some people
they
saying
took time to think it out and answer.
This wasn't just like here come the liberal responses. This was all over the ideological map. But I was so pleased that people sat down and took the time to think it through and write careful letters about where they were. Most people were alarmed, but some weren't.
One of my favorite shows, too, and we talked about this earlier, was your live performance in Pittsburgh, Kansas.
It was one of the greatest performing arts centers in the world. Yes, I love to do these shows where I'm performing somewhere and they happen to be willing to record it, and I love to do the concert series on Jefferson.
And then in October, we had another good conversation with Professor Ellis about his new book, American Dialogue.
And just a couple of weeks later, Valley Forge.
Right, but between that, we did what was Graham's favorite show.
Our webmaster.
Water for a Dry Land. He said he learned so much from that.
And that was about the Ogallala Aquifer, which
right.
is an aquifer that has the same amount of volume as Lake Huron, that underlies parts of Texas, Nebraska, New Mexico, Colorado, Kansas, and Wyoming, but particularly Nebraska. And it's being pumped dry. It's a non-recharging aquifer, and the question is, can you have Jeffersonian agriculture that is non-sustainable with a resource as central to agriculture as water?
And then we went to Valley Forge, the two authors, Bob Drury and Tom Clavin.
Great book on how difficult Valley Forge was, and they were guests of this program. We want more authors to appear on the show as we go forward.
And then in December, we went right at the beginning of December with a show with our friend Bo Wright, who showed up.
Of Lynchburg.
Yeah, showed up here, and we had a great conversation with him.
People turn up from time to time, and here he was. You took him out to dinner.
Yeah, it was a great time.
And he's our friend from Lynchburg in the shadow of Jefferson's poplar forest. He comes on from time to try to give us a sense of what it was like for him to work within the White House.
Brilliant guy, great friend, and we sort of ended out the year with a number of shows on Madison, and here we are, and sir, it's time for this week's Jefferson Watch.
I've had such a good year. I really loved the year 2018, but I'm even more looking forward to the year 2019.
And I'm glad you said that, because as you started the program, Janus looking backward. Next week, we're going to look forward. We have a bunch of show suggestions from our listeners, so we have that to look forward to.
Today, we had a meeting, and during our lunch provided by Rob Barron, and we planned out the year 2019. We want listener help.
Yeah.
We want a lot of listener help.
So with that, sir, it is now time for this week's Jefferson Watch.
Happy New Year, everyone. I've been thinking about the Lewis and Clark expedition, dispatched into the wilderness by President Jefferson, who lived his long and productive life at a very high level of comfort. It's impossible to imagine Jefferson roughing it. He would have needed one of those Henry V royal tents with a wine steward and a chef, a wall of books, and perhaps a string quartet. Meanwhile, Meriwether Lewis, who had lived for 2 years in the White House before his great journey, was out in the middle of nowhere trying to propel a party of 33 men and 1 woman 10 to 20 miles per day in the direction of the Pacific Ocean. The only really civilized individual he could talk with during those 28 months was William Clark, who was an exceedingly able, practical, intelligent man, but not an intellectual. He was a frontiersman of Kentucky, the best man in the world to take on practical tasks one after the next, to accomplish them without fanfare, and to write them up with some of the worst spelling in exploration history. The Lewis and Clark expedition was a provisioning challenge, at times a provisioning nightmare, along the lines of the film Apollo 13. You can never take everything you're going to need, so you know from the start that you're going to run out of key supplies, and you're going to have to make do using your wits and whatever you can gather from the woods. Think of Clark as MacGyver. Take boots, for example. If I were going on a 7,689-mile hike, I would lay in a supply of the best footwear I could afford. The men of the expedition undoubtedly started out with good boots, but by the time they got to the Pacific coast in November of 1805, those boots were all either gone or on life support, and no duct tape in the toolbox. One of their men, Joseph Whitehouse, knew something about tailoring, or let us say skin dressing, and he supervised at Fort Clatsop the frontier manufacture of 338 pairs of moccasins. That's 676 individual moccasins, hand-stitched with sinew and awls. I have an image of a little Fort Clatsop crafting seminar, with Whitehouse explaining to the men how to measure their feet, cut rawhide, and stick a sharp awl through 2 layers of leather without jabbing your hands, which, by the way, you invariably do. I can see Toussaint Charbonneau cutting up and mouthing off, gruffly asserting that he ain't going to do no women's work, and so on, while his wife Sacagawea quietly turns out a perfect pair of beaded moccasins in 15 minutes. Since there were 33 in the permanent traveling party, that's 10 pairs of moccasins per person to get home to St. Louis, where you can bet one of the first things everyone did was find a shoe store. Boots are just a metaphor for all that was missing by January 1st, 1806. They had run out of whiskey. They were nearly out of tobacco, which is apparently the fuel that got the men to drag 60,000 pounds of gear towards the sunset. Whatever cloth clothing they had once had was long since gone. Lewis had to trade his fancy officer's coat for a canoe at one point, and he threw a little hissy fit, said, and you can hear the wounded pomposity, "I think the United States are indebted to me for another uniform coat, for that which I have disposed on this occasion was but little worn." To summarize, Lewis and Clark left St. Louis on May 14, 1804, in full military regalia, with a maximum payload of things that they would need to complete their epic journey. As they ascended what Lewis called the heretofore deemed endless Missouri River, they used up, lost, gave away, and broke most of what they had started out with, until by the time they reached the source of the Missouri on August 12, 1805, they had shed layer after layer after layer of the thin integument of civilization, and they were now reduced to what King Lear called unaccommodated man. Lewis himself observed that he had been transformed from a highly civilized man, friend of the president, member of the American Philosophical Society, Freemason, United States Army captain, into what he called a perfect Indian. By the time the expedition moved into Fort Clatsop just before Christmas 1805, Lewis's spiritual energy was largely spent. His mind was now fixated on just a couple of propositions. First, would they encounter some sort of trading vessel in the bays near the mouth of the Columbia from which he could resupply the expedition? He had in his possession a universal letter of credit with the seal of the United States supplied by the ingenious president. Second, what was the minimum amount of time they would have to stay in the vicinity of the Pacific Ocean to maximize their chances of encountering that trade vessel? It did not matter what country's flag it might be flying, but also the minimum amount of time the Bitterroot Mountains would need to be clear enough of the winter snowpack for them to punch through on their homeward journey. This last puzzle turned out to be one of the most frustrating challenges of the whole expedition. And third, how could the men and one woman of the Corps of Discovery occupy themselves through a lean winter in a rain-drenched place in a way that kept up their physical strength if possible, prevented them from the kind of cabin fever that could lead to quarreling or worse, and not lose their team spirit for what was apparently going to be a very, very long return journey, this time without even minimally adequate gear? They were really counting on that trade ship, and they were not going to meet one. All that must serve as background to Meriwether Lewis's New Year's Day journal entry at Fort Clatsop. I quote, "This morning I was awoke at an early hour by the discharge of a volley of small arms which were fired by our party in front of our quarters to usher in the new year. This was the only mark of respect which we had it in our power to pay this celebrated day. Our repast of this day, though better than that of Christmas, consisted principally in the anticipation of the first day of January 1807, when in the bosom of our friends we hoped to participate in the mirth and hilarity of the day, and when the zest given by the recollection of the present we shall completely, both mentally and corporally, enjoy the repast which the hand of civilization has prepared for us. At present we were content with eating our boiled elk and wapato and solacing our thirst with our only beverage, pure water. Poor homesick Meriwether Lewis. He wrote this journal entry as far from Philadelphia and the White House as it was possible to be and still be in North America. He's writing in hand-crafted moccasins at a desk hewn for him by the expedition's crude carpenters in a miserable hut without glass windows with a smoky fire in the crude fireplace, because the wood is wet, of course, and if he needs to use the bathroom, well, there's an Army regulation pit about 50 yards from the fort. His dinner is lean, half-rancid boiled elk, yum, and an insipid freshwater swamp potato known as the wapato root, dug up by Indian women with their feet as they stand in the swamps. You have to decide how to read the tone of his last phrase, solacing our thirst with our only beverage, pure water. Is he in near suicidal despair? Is he feeling sorry for himself? Is he pretending some cheerful and bemused commentary on their destitute state? Or is he quietly reveling in the heroic deprivations of the true hero, the authentic explorer who has recently marched 2,000 miles over a country on which the foot of civilized man has never trodden, as Lewis put it? We don't quite know. What we do know is that Lewis is thinking about Thomas Jefferson's annual New Year's Day reception at the White House. Lewis has participated in at least one of those splendid gatherings, perhaps two, and he is determined to be at the January 1st, 1807 White House party. Champagne, 4 or 5 or even 7 different types of wine, a fabulous array of desserts, pies, sweetmeats, cold cuts, and maybe even Jefferson's celebrated baked Alaska, a hot puff pastry which, when you cut into it, reveals a creamy ball of frozen ice cream. Oh my, bring it. And I think perhaps I'll pass on that wapato casserole, Mr. President. Who would not want to share in Thomas Jefferson's hospitality? His exquisite sense of taste, his fussy insistence on the finest European wines that could be procured in the United States in 1807, his graciousness, plus music by the Marine Corps Band, which Jefferson has made his own, and perhaps even a bit of whatever is left of the world's largest cheese. Women in beautiful dresses with early 19th century cleavage, conversations with senators, scientists, philosophers, and even America's Da Vinci himself, the third President of the United States, the Honorable Thomas Jefferson. Who wouldn't be homesick? Have another glass of pure water, Captain Lewis. Time is now on your side. I'm Clay Jenkinson, wishing you a Happy New Year to all of our friends at the Thomas Jefferson Hour. We'll see you next week for another exciting edition of the Thomas Jefferson Hour.
The Thomas Jefferson Hour is brought to you each week by Dakota Sky Education. The program is distributed nationally by Prairie Public Radio. President Thomas Jefferson lived from 1743 to 1826, and this program presents his views. President Jefferson is portrayed by the award-winning humanities scholar and author Clay S. Jenkinson. To obtain a copy of this or any past show for a $12 donation, please call 888-828-2853. Again, that number is 888-828-2853. This program is also available online at jeffersonhour.org and on iTunes. If you'd like to correspond with President Jefferson or submit a question for him to answer on the program, please visit the website at jeffersonhour.org. The Thomas Jefferson Hour is produced at Makoche Recording Studios in Bismarck, North Dakota. Music by Stephen Swinford. Thank you for listening. Please tune in again next week for another thought-provoking, historically accurate program through the eyes of Thomas Jefferson.